6-year-old girl sells drawings for $1. Millionaire CEO collapses when he sees her reason why. On a rain-soaked corner of Manhattan, where towering skyscrapers cast long shadows over the bustling streets, 6-year-old Emily Bennett sat with her worn sketchbook and a box of broken crayons. Unlike the usual child vendors selling candy or flowers, she offered something different: crayon drawings for $1 each. "Would you like to buy my drawing?" Her crystal clear voice barely carried over the city noise as she held up her artwork to passing strangers. "Just $1, please." The drawing caught James Richardson's eye not for its artistic merit, but for its peculiar subject matter: dozens of small white circles carefully arranged on the paper. As the CEO of America's largest healthcare corporation paused in his $1,000 shoes, something in the child's determined gaze made him stop. Those eyes held a weight no child should bear. "What are these white circles, sweetheart?" he asked, pointing to the drawing. "Those are Mom's pills," Sir Emily replied solemnly. "The ones we can't afford anymore." Those simple words would change both their lives forever. Life hadn't always been a series of rainy days and dollar drawings for Emily Bennett. Just 6 months ago, she lived in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment in Queens with her mother Sarah and 2-year-old brother Tommy. Their home wasn't luxurious, but it was filled with warmth, laughter, and the sweet aroma of her mother's famous chocolate chip cookies that she'd bake every Sunday. Emily was a bright student at PS 41, where her art teacher, Mrs. Anderson, often praised her unique way of seeing the world through colors. Her kindergarten drawings covered the classroom walls: happy families, rainbow-colored houses, and her signature subject, her mother in nurse's scrubs, always drawn with a big red heart on the pocket. She dreamed of becoming a doctor, inspired by watching her mother care for others at Metropolitan Hospital. The change began slowly, like shadows lengthening across their living room floor. First, her mother started coming home later, taking extra shifts to cover mounting bills. Emily would sit by the window, coloring pictures until she saw her mother's tired figure walking up the street. She never complained about having to heat up her own dinner or putting Tommy to bed. She understood that grown-ups sometimes had to work hard. Then came the dizzy spells. Sarah would pause while cooking, gripping the kitchen counter until her knuckles turned white. She'd wave off Emily's concerned looks with a forced smile, but the 6-year-old noticed how her mother's scrubs began hanging looser, how dark circles formed under her eyes like smudged charcoal. The day everything changed started like any other. Emily was helping Tommy with his blocks when she heard a crash from the bathroom. She found her mother collapsed on the floor, pale as the tile beneath her. The ambulance lights painted their apartment walls in alternating red and white, a sight that would haunt Emily's dreams for months to come. The diagnosis came with words too big for Emily to understand, but she comprehended the fear in the doctor's voice. Her mother needed expensive medication, regular treatments, and rest, 3 things they couldn't afford on a single nurse's salary. Insurance denied their claims, citing pre-existing conditions in language that meant nothing to a 6-year-old, but everything to their future. Emily watched as their life began to unravel like a loose thread pulled from a favorite sweater. Her mother tried to hide the mounting bills, but Emily saw them piling up on the kitchen table, saw the red stamps that screamed final notice in angry capital letters. She started skipping lunch at school, saving her lunch money in a small tin can labeled Mom's medicine. The morning she overheard her mother sobbing on the phone with Grandma Jean in Oregon, Emily made a decision. She gathered her art supplies, the crayons from last Christmas, paper from her school notebook, and the determination that burned brighter than her fear. If grown-ups could work to earn money, so could she. That first day on the street, she was terrified. The city seemed bigger, louder, scarier without her mother beside her. But she remembered Tommy's innocent face, asking why Mummy was always sleeping, and her fear transformed into resolve. She set up her makeshift art stand using a cardboard box from the recycling bin, carefully arranging her drawings like precious gallery pieces. Some people ignored her, others shooed her away, but a few kind souls stopped. An elderly woman bought 3 drawings, tears in her eyes as she pressed $5 into Emily's small hand. A hot dog vendor gave her free lunch and a prime spot near his cart. Day by day, dollar by dollar, she built her medicine fund, keeping her secret from her increasingly worried mother. What started as a desperate child's plan became a daily routine. School, quick lunch, art homework on the streets, then home before her mother's evening shift ended. Emily learned to read the ebb and flow of Manhattan crowds, discovered which corners offered the best shelter from rain, and mastered the art of making her drawings last longer by pressing lighter with her crayons. But beneath her grown-up facade, she was still just a 6-year-old missing her normal life. At night, after Tommy was asleep and she could hear her mother's labored breathing from the next room, Emily would curl up with her sketchbook and draw what she really wanted: her family whole again, her mother strong and smiling. Their home filled with the scent of Sunday cookies and the sound of Tommy's laughter. This was Emily Bennett's life before James Richardson stopped at her corner, a child carrying adult burdens, drawing not just pictures but lifelines, $1 at a time. Sarah Parker had always been the kind of nurse other staff members spoke about in reverent tones. For 15 years at Metropolitan Hospital, she was the one who remembered every patient's name, who stayed past her shifts to hold the hands of the dying, who spent her lunch breaks reading to children in the pediatric ward. Her dedication wasn't just professional, it was personal, rooted in a promise she made to her own mother, who passed away when Sarah was just 16. Before her illness, Sarah worked in the cardiac care unit, where her gentle touch and unwavering compassion made her legendary among patients and staff alike. She was the nurse who mortgaged her own house to help pay for a patient's life-saving surgery when insurance denied them. The one who organized fundraisers for families struggling with medical bills, never imagining she would one day be on the receiving end of such charity. The irony was bitter. After spending years fighting insurance companies for her patients, Sarah now found herself entangled in the same bureaucratic nightmare. The company that had seemed so legitimate, offering affordable coverage for her family, turned out to be an elaborate scam. By the time she discovered the truth, they had vanished with her life savings, leaving her with worthless papers and mounting medical bills. Her condition deteriorated rapidly. What started as occasional chest pain and fatigue evolved into something more sinister. The doctors, many of whom were former colleagues, looked at her charts with growing concern. The medication she needed cost more per month than she made in 2 weeks, and without insurance, each hospital visit felt like signing away her children's future. Sarah tried everything to keep their life normal. She picked up extra shifts until her body refused to cooperate, took out loans with crushing interest rates, and sold everything of value they owned. Each morning, she'd force a smile for Emily and Tommy, hiding the pill bottle she couldn't refill, pretending the dizziness wasn't getting worse. But at night, alone with her fears, she would silently cry into her pillow, terrified not of death, but of leaving her children alone. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday. Mr. Thompson, their landlord of 5 years, seemed almost apologetic as he explained that business was business. Sarah had begged for more time, offering to work as the building's cleaner in exchange for reduced rent. But the city was unforgiving, and sympathy didn't pay property taxes. They had 1 week to leave. That week, Sarah noticed changes in Emily. Her bright, chatty daughter became quieter, more serious. She insisted on making her own lunch, claimed she was eating at friends' houses after school. Sarah knew something was wrong, but between managing her illness, caring for Tommy, and trying to find a solution to their housing crisis, she didn't have the energy to investigate further. The day they moved into their car, Sarah felt she had failed as a mother. The back seat became their bedroom, the trunk their closet, and a cooler their kitchen. She arranged their few remaining possessions to create some semblance of home, hanging Emily's drawings on the windows like curtains. Tommy, too young to understand, thought they were camping. Emily, too old for her years, never complained. What hurt most wasn't the physical discomfort or the shame of washing up in public restrooms. It was watching Emily's childhood slip away day by day. The little girl who once danced around their apartment singing made-up songs now moved with the careful deliberation of a miniature adult. Sarah would catch her daughter watching her sleep, counting her breaths, just as she used to do with her critical care patients. The final blow came when her former supervisor called, reluctantly explaining that they couldn't hold her position any longer. Without steady work, even the car might soon be gone. Sarah had spent her career saving others, but now she couldn't save herself or protect her children from the harsh realities of poverty. Yet even in their darkest moments, Sarah's nurse's heart wouldn't let her give up. She kept detailed records of her symptoms, rationed her remaining medication, and researched free clinics. She taught Emily and Tommy to find joy in small things: the sunrise over the city, the pigeons dancing on windowsills, the occasional free concert in the park. Every night he would tell them stories about their grandmother, a strong woman who never lost hope, praying she could live up to that legacy. James Richardson's corner office on the 47th floor of Richardson Healthcare Tower offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, but his mind often wandered to a different view: the cramped apartment window of his childhood, where he used to watch his mother trudge home from her third job of the day. 30 years hadn't dulled the memory of those lean years, when dinner was often just crackers and hope. Born to a single mother in the Bronx, young James learned early that life wasn't fair. His mother, Mary Richardson, worked as a cleaning lady, waitress and night security guard, somehow still finding energy to help him with homework. She'd always tell him, "Education is the one thing they can't take from you." Jamie, those words became his mantra, driving him through sleepless nights of studying by candlelight when the electricity was cut off. The turning point came harsh and fast. Mary collapsed during her cleaning shift at a prestigious law firm. The irony was cruel. She fell ill in one of the city's most expensive buildings, but couldn't afford the ambulance ride to the hospital. James, then 15, took over her cleaning job, going to school by day and scrubbing floors by night. His mother's condition worsened, but their insurance claim was denied. The same system he now commanded had once condemned his mother. James watched helplessly as his mother faded away in a charity ward, her last words urging him to study hard and make something of himself. The day after her funeral, he walked into that law firm still in his borrowed funeral suit and asked for a job, any job. Something in his determination moved the senior partner, who offered him a position as a mailroom clerk with the condition that he maintained good grades. The years that followed were a blur of dawn to dusk effort. High school valedictorian, scholarship to Columbia, law school at night, while working days. James learned to navigate the corporate world with the same precision he once used to calculate which bills they could afford to pay. He specialized in healthcare law, driven by a mission he couldn't quite articulate but felt in his bones. His rise through corporate ranks was meteoric. From legal counsel to executive vice president, then CEO of Richardson Healthcare by 35. He built the company into an industry giant, but insisted on maintaining a charitable foundation that covered medical costs for underprivileged families. Yet something always felt incomplete each time he signed off on a major deal. He wondered if his mother would be proud or disappointed in what he'd become. The corporate world changed him, subtly at first, then more profoundly. The sharp suits and shareholder meetings began to distance him from his roots. His mother's photo still sat on his desk, but some days he caught himself thinking more about profit margins than the people behind the numbers. The board members praised his practical approach, never knowing how each denied claim form he signed felt like a betrayal of his past. His marriage crumbled under the weight of his dedication to work. His ex-wife called him obsessed with success, but she never understood that for James, success meant never having to watch another child lose their mother to a broken system. The divorce left him with an emptier penthouse and a fuller bank account, neither of which filled the growing void inside. Recently, rumors had reached him about a subsidiary company's questionable practices, but board meetings and expansion plans kept pushing the investigation back. James told himself he would look into it eventually, unaware that eventually was about to crash into now. On a rainy Manhattan street corner. The morning he met Emily, James had just finished a board meeting about quarterly profits. His coffee was still warm in its designer cup when he first saw her drawings. Something about her reminded him of himself at that age, the same determined set of the jaw, the same too-old-looking young eyes. But it was the drawing of pills that stopped him in his tracks, triggering memories he'd spent years trying to forget. Here he stood, having achieved everything his mother dreamed for him, yet confronted by the same injustice that took her life. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had built an empire trying to fix a broken system, only to find that perhaps he had become part of that very system. The little girl with her dollar drawings was about to remind him of who he used to be, and in doing so, set in motion changes that would shake the foundations of everything he'd built. The morning drizzle had turned into a steady downpour when Frank Miller, head of security at the Richardson Tower, first noticed Emily setting up her makeshift art display near the building's entrance. His 20 years of experience taught him that street vendors, especially children, meant trouble, either scams or worse, negative publicity for the corporate tenants. "Hey kid, you can't sell stuff here," Frank called out, his voice gruff from years of barking orders. "This is private property." Emily looked up, her small hands clutching her drawings protectively against the rain. She had learned to read the different types of rejection, the hurried dismissals, the sympathetic decline, and the hostile warnings. This was definitely the latter. A small crowd of office workers had gathered, some pausing in their morning rush to watch the scene unfold. Among them, Linda Thompson, a paralegal, muttered loudly about irresponsible parents using children to beg. Her words carried to Emily's ears, causing the girl's cheeks to flush red, but her feet remained planted firmly on the wet concrete. "I'm not begging," Emily's voice was quiet but clear. "I'm selling my art." Like a real business, she held up a drawing of a hospital room, complete with detailed medical equipment she'd learned to sketch from memory. A few onlookers snickered, one businessman deliberately dropping his empty coffee cup near her display. Frank advanced, his security badge glinting under the streetlights. "Listen, kid, I don't want to call social services, but if you don't move along," he left the threat hanging in the damp air. Emily's hands trembled, but she remembered her mother's labored breathing, Tommy's fever, and the empty pill bottles. "Please, sir," she tried again, her voice stronger. "I'm not hurting anyone. I just need to help my mom." The sincerity in her voice made Frank hesitate, his hand hovering over his radio. In that moment of uncertainty, a sharp voice cut through the tension. What exactly seems to be the problem here? James Richardson had emerged from his car, witnessing the last part of the confrontation. Frank straightened immediately, recognition flooding his face. "Mr. Richardson, sir, I was just removing this unauthorized vendor from the premises, as per company policy." James studied the scene, the scattered drawings getting soaked in the rain, the hostile faces of the morning crowd, and Emily's determined stance. In her eyes, he saw a reflection of his younger self selling newspapers outside this very building decades ago. "This unauthorized vendor," James said slowly, "is a child trying to help her family. Something that should be admired, not punished." He turned to Emily, whose chin had lifted slightly at his defense. "Young lady, how much for all your drawings?" The crowd's mood shifted palpably. Linda Thompson's earlier comments died in her throat. Frank took a step back, his authority deflating. Emily, however, shook her head. "They're $1 each, sir. No discount or charity. Mom says honest work deserves honest pay." James felt something inside him crack at those words. Here was a child soaked to the bone, being harassed and humiliated, yet maintaining her dignity and principles. He knelt down, not caring about his expensive suit pants on the wet pavement, and looked her in the eyes. "Then I'll pay $1 for each, because they're worth every penny." The story of their eviction tumbled out of Emily as she helped James gather her rain-soaked drawings. Mr. Wilson Thompson, no relation to the sneering paralegal, had been their landlord for 5 years in a modest Queens apartment. He'd always praised Sarah's punctual payments and quiet tenancy, even bragging to other tenants about having a nurse in his building. That changed the day Sarah's illness forced her to cut back her hours. Mr. Thompson came on Tommy's birthday, Emily recalled, carefully placing her drawings in James's leather briefcase, which he'd offered as shelter from the rain. Mom had just managed to buy a small cake. We hadn't even sung happy birthday yet. Her voice carried the weight of a memory no 6-year-old should possess. The eviction notice had been impersonal, typed in cold legal language that Sarah had to read 3 times before the reality sank in. Emily described how her mother had pleaded with Mr. Thompson, offering to work as the building's nurse, to clean the halls, anything to buy them more time. The landlord's response had been, "Simple business is business, Sarah. I'm not running a charity." They were given 3 days to vacate, not even the legal minimum, but Sarah lacked the resources to fight it. Emily watched as neighbors they'd known for years suddenly became strangers, closing their doors when they passed in the hallway. Only Mrs. Chen from apartment 4 billion helped, offering to store some of their belongings in her cramped storage space. Mum tried to pack our important stuff first, Emily continued, her small fingers tracing water droplets on her drawing. But Mr. Thompson changed the locks. While Mum was at the free clinic, her voice trembled slightly. "All my school books. Tommy's favorite teddy bear. Mum's nursing awards, they're still in there? He said we can have them back when Mum pays the back rent." James listened, his jaw tightening with each detail. This wasn't just an eviction, it was an erasure of dignity, a theft of memories. Emily described their first night in the car, how she pretended it was a camping adventure to keep Tommy from crying, how she drew pictures on the foggy windows to make him laugh. "The worst part," Emily whispered, looking around as if sharing a secret, "is that Mum doesn't know I'm here. She thinks I'm at school." But school ended 2 hours ago, and she trailed off, suddenly realizing she'd said too much. And their possessions, what little they'd managed to save, were Tetris packed into their old Honda Civic, parked 3 blocks away. Sarah slept there between shifts at whatever temporary work she could find, while Emily watched over Tommy, trying to keep him quiet so nobody would notice them living in the car. "Mom says we're just between homes right now," Emily explained with forced brightness, the kind that breaks hearts. "She says home is wherever we're together, but..." She glanced at her remaining drawings, most of them showing houses with smoking chimneys and flower gardens. "I still miss having a real door to close." James felt the weight of every word. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with messages about board meetings and profit margins, but for the first time in years, those seemed trivial compared to the story unfolding before him. A sudden gust of wind scattered Emily's remaining drawings across the wet sidewalk. She lunged to catch them, her small hands grasping at the flying papers while James quickly moved to help. Among the scattered artwork, a folded piece of paper, different from the others, caught his eye. Unlike her colorful drawings, this was lined notebook paper, carefully folded and worn at the edges from frequent handling. As James reached for it, Emily's face changed from grateful to panicked. "No, please. That's private," but the wind had already delivered the letter into James's hands. His eyes caught fragments of childish handwriting before Emily could reclaim it. "Dear Mom, I'm sorry I'm not a better daughter." "Emily," James said gently, still holding the letter. "May I?" Something in his tone made her hesitate, her usual determination wavering. After a moment, she nodded, though her eyes remained fixed on the ground. The letter, written in careful elementary school penmanship, read, "Dear Mom, I'm sorry I'm not a better daughter. I know you told me never to lie, but I haven't been at school these afternoons. I've been selling my drawings to help buy your medicine. Please don't be mad. Tommy needs you to get better, and I need you too." I hear you crying at night when you think we're asleep. I want to hug you, but I'm scared you'll find out about the drawings. The nice hot dog man gives me lunch sometimes, so I can save my lunch money for your pills. I'm being careful like you taught me, and I never talk to strangers except to sell drawings. Sometimes people are mean, but I remember what you always say about being brave. I made $27 so far. It's not enough yet, but I won't give up. You never gave up on your patients, so I won't give up on you. I promise I'll be a better daughter when you're better. Maybe we can bake cookies again like before. Tommy misses your cookies. I miss your smile. Love always. Emily. Yes, I'm keeping track of all the money like you taught me. $1 per drawing. No cheating. James's hands trembled as he finished reading. In his 30 years of business, through countless mergers and billion-dollar deals, no document had ever hit him this hard. The letter bore the fingerprints of countless readings, its creases softened by frequent folding and unfolding, as if Emily drew strength from carrying her confession close to her heart. "She can't know," Emily whispered, finally looking up at him. Her eyes, too old for her young face, held a mixture of fear and fierce protection. It would make her sad, and the doctor said she needs to stay calm. James knelt again, holding the letter with the reverence it deserved. In this moment, he wasn't a CEO worth billions. He was again that 15-year-old boy who had hidden his own letter from his dying mother, explaining why their electricity had been cut off because he'd used the money for her medication instead. "Emily," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "your mother won't be mad. You're not a bad daughter. He paused, searching for words that could capture the magnitude of her actions. You're extraordinary." He carefully refolded the letter and handed it back to Emily, who quickly tucked it into her pocket, close to her heart. As she did so, a business card fell from between her drawings, Metropolitan Hospital's logo clearly visible, along with a familiar name that made James's blood run cold: Dr. Sarah Parker, Cardiac Care Unit. The connection clicked into place like a key turning in a lock. Sarah Parker, the nurse who had cared for his mother in her final days, who had fought the insurance company on their behalf, who had stayed past her shifts to hold his mother's hand. The same Sarah Parker who had been investigating insurance fraud cases before suddenly disappearing from the hospital staff. The realization hit James like a physical blow as he stared at Sarah Parker's worn hospital ID card. Memories flooded back, not of board meetings or corporate mergers, but of a kind-faced nurse who had made his mother's last days bearable 15 years ago. The same nurse who had fought tirelessly against the insurance company that denied his mother's claims, who had organized fundraisers, and who had held his hand when he had no more tears left to cry. "Your mother," James's voice was barely a whisper. "She works in the cardiac unit." Emily nodded, confused by the sudden intensity in his expression. "Used to," she corrected. "Before she got sick." "Did you know her?" James closed his eyes, transported back to that sterile hospital room where his mother spent her final days. Sarah Parker had been more than just a nurse. She had been their advocate, their comfort, their guardian angel. She would stay past her shifts, bringing home cooked meals and used textbooks for James, understanding that a growing boy needed both nourishment and hope. "Your mother," he began carefully, "once took care of someone very special to me. My own mother, Mary Richardson." The name sparked no recognition in Emily's eyes. She was too young to know the story that had made headlines 15 years ago: "Nurse remortgages home to save patient." The headlines hadn't told the whole story. Sarah had done more than just offer financial help. When the insurance company denied Mary Richardson's claims, citing pre-existing conditions, Sarah had launched an investigation. She had discovered patterns of fraudulent claim denials, particularly targeting low-income patients. Her findings had made it to the desk of several executives, but then mysteriously vanished. Now, standing in the rain with Emily, pieces began falling into place. The suspicious subsidiary company, the pattern of denied claims, The sudden pressure from the board to shut down investigations into their claims department, it all connected to Sarah Parker's original investigation. Emily James said, his voice thick with emotion, "Your mother is one of the most remarkable people I've ever known." He pulled out his phone, quickly dialing his assistant. "Cancel all my meetings for the day. And get me everything we have on Metropolitan Hospital's insurance claim records for the past 15 years. Emily watched him, her young face etched with worry. "Are you going to help my mum?" The question was both hopeful and wary. She had learned not to trust easy solutions. James knelt down to her level, rain soaking through his expensive suit. "Your mother helped save hundreds of lives, including giving my mother dignity in her final days. She fought against injustice when no one else would." And now he paused, emotion catching in his throat. "It's my turn to fight for her." But first he needed to see Sarah. The universe had a strange way of bringing things full circle. 15 years ago, he had been the desperate son watching his mother slip away while Sarah fought the system. Now he was the system, and Sarah's daughter was the one selling drawings on street corners. "Emily, where is your mother now?" The girl hesitated, years of don't talk to strangers warring with desperate hope. James pulled out his old wallet, photo one he kept behind the sleek business cards and credit cards. It showed a much younger him with his mother and a smiling Sarah Parker in hospital scrubs. "She's in our car," Emily finally said, pointing down the street. "But she's usually sleeping this time of day. The new medicine makes her really tired." She paused, then added with the innocent directness of a child, "Are you really going to help? Because Mom says we shouldn't trust insurance people anymore. They took all our savings." The irony of her words wasn't lost on James. He, who had built his empire on the very industry that had failed both their mothers, now stood at a crossroads. The right choice was clear, but the path would be complicated. Taking on the insurance fraud would mean facing his own board, risking his position, and possibly his company. But looking at Emily, seeing Sarah's same determination in her young eyes, he knew there was only one choice. He had spent 15 years building a system that had somehow become the very thing he had once fought against. It was time to remember why he had started this journey in the first place. As they walked toward the parked Honda Civic, Emily suddenly stopped, her small hand tugging at James's sleeve. "Wait," she whispered, her voice trembling. "There's something else I haven't told Mom." Her eyes darted nervously to the sidewalk, then back to James. "It's about Tommy." Through the rain-streaked windows of the car, James could make out the sleeping figure of Sarah Parker in the back seat, but the toddler was nowhere to be seen. Emily's next words came out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for too long. "Tommy's staying with Mrs. Chen from our old building. He's been really sick, but Mrs. Chen used to be a pediatric nurse in China. She's watching him." Emily's voice cracked, "while I try to get money for both their medicines." The weight of this revelation hit James hard. This 6-year-old wasn't just trying to save her mother, she was carrying the burden of her entire family's survival. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket, different from her drawings. It was a prescription, the handwriting familiar from his own mother's hospital days. "Tommy has the same heart problem as Mom," Emily explained, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "The doctor at the free clinic said it's hereditary." She sounded out the word carefully, like she'd practiced it many times. "But we can only afford medicine for one of them right now. Mom doesn't know about Tommy yet. Mrs. Chen helps with some traditional medicine, but..." James felt his chest tighten. The same genetic condition that was taking Sarah was also threatening her 2-year-old son. The cruel irony was that the medication they needed was manufactured by one of his company's subsidiaries. "Every morning," Emily continued, her words tumbling out now that she'd started, "I have to choose which drawings to sell where. The ones of animals, kids like those better, so I sell them near the park. The ones with hearts and hospitals, grown-ups buy those more, especially near the medical buildings. I save the really good ones for rainy days because fewer people stop then." She pulled out a small notebook, its pages wrinkled from the rain. Inside was a careful accounting that would have impressed his CFO: dates, locations, sales, and 2 separate columns labeled Mom's Medicine and Tommy's Fund. Mrs. Chen gives me updates through her daughter Jenny. She's in my class. That's how I know how Tommy's doing without Mom finding out. I'm not really at after-school art club. Emily's organizational skills would have been impressive if they weren't so heartbreaking. Sometimes when I make enough for Mom's medicine, I try to buy some for Tommy too, but it's never enough for both. Her voice dropped even lower. Last night, Tommy had a really bad fever. Mrs. Chen wanted to call Mom, but I begged her not to. Mom can't handle any more stress. The doctor was very clear about that. James realized he was witnessing something both extraordinary and devastating: a child creating an entire underground support system, coordinating medical care, and making decisions that would overwhelm most adults. Emily had essentially become a one-child healthcare management system, complete with logistics, accounting, and crisis management. The hardest part, Emily admitted, wiping her eyes with her sleeve, is when Tommy cries for Mom. He doesn't understand why he can't be with her. I tell him it's because he's on a special adventure with Mrs. Chen, but... She looked up at James, her eyes carrying a wisdom far beyond her years. I don't know how much longer I can keep them apart. Tommy's getting worse, and Mom keeps asking to see him. The complexity of Emily's deception, born of love and desperate necessity, was staggering. She had created an intricate web of white lies, all designed to protect both her sick mother and ailing brother, while carrying the knowledge that any day either situation could become critical. James's phone buzzed with an urgent message from his assistant files found on Metropolitan Hospital claims. Urgent. Subsidiary Heartland Insurance involved. His blood ran cold as he read the name. Heartland Insurance, the same company that had denied his mother's claims 15 years ago, the same company Sarah had been investigating, and now the same company that had taken her life savings. Standing there in the rain with Emily, James opened the attached files on his phone. His hands trembled as he scrolled through document after document. Heartland Insurance wasn't just a subsidiary, it was a carefully constructed fraud machine designed to collect premiums and deny claims through a maze of technicalities and false paperwork. Mr. Richardson, his assistant's voice came through as he answered her call. The board is demanding an emergency meeting. They know you're looking into Heartland. The panic in her voice was clear. Sir, your signature is on their incorporation documents from 5 years ago. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had signed those papers during a particularly busy acquisition period, trusting his board's recommendations. He'd been so focused on expanding the company, on building his empire, that he'd become the very thing he'd once despised. Emily, he said, turning to the little girl who was watching him with worried eyes, I need you to tell me exactly what happened with your mother's insurance. As she recounted the story, the smooth-talking agent, the seemingly legitimate paperwork, the premiums that disappeared into nothing, James felt physically ill. His company, or at least a part of it that bore his signature, had done this. Not just to Sarah and Emily, but to thousands of others. The documentation his assistant had sent showed a pattern stretching across 5 states, targeting specifically vulnerable populations: single parents, elderly retirees, immigrant families. James pulled up the board member list for Heartland Insurance. Names jumped out at him: people he'd trusted, people who sat across from him at luxury restaurants discussing profit margins while families like Emily slept in cars. At the top of the list, William Preston, his own mentor and board chairman. His phone buzzed again, Preston himself calling. James let it go to voicemail, already knowing what the message would be. Damage control. Plausible deniability. The usual corporate dance of avoiding responsibility. Your drawings, James said suddenly, turning to Emily, the ones with the pills. How many different medications did you draw? Emily looked surprised but answered quickly. 7 different kinds. Mom needs 3 and Tommy needs 4. I memorized all their names and what they look like. James pulled up his company's pharmaceutical catalog. Every single medication she named was manufactured by Richardson Healthcare subsidiaries. The markup on each was over 3,000%, another revelation that made his stomach turn. His phone buzzed continuously, now board members, lawyers, PR teams, all trying to contain a situation they didn't yet realize had become uncontainable. Because James Richardson, CEO of Richardson Healthcare, had finally remembered why he'd built this company in the first place. "Emily," he said, kneeling down to her level, "I'm going to tell you something very important. My company, the one I run, it's partly responsible for what happened to your family. I didn't know. But that's no excuse. I should have known. I should have checked." The little girl's face showed confusion, then understanding beyond her years. "Are you one of the bad insurance people?" she asked, taking a small step back. "I became one without meaning to," James admitted, the truth painful but necessary. "But now I have a chance to fix it. Your mother tried to expose this years ago, and they stopped her. They won't stop me." His phone buzzed again, Preston's name flashing. This time James answered, putting it on speaker. "James, what the hell are you doing?" Preston's voice was controlled but furious. "Do you realize what investigating Heartland could do to our stock prices?" James looked at Emily, at her rain-soaked drawings, at the car where her mother slept, then at his reflection in a nearby window, the expensive suit, the corporate success, the man he'd become while forgetting the boy he'd been. "Actually, Bill," he replied, his voice steady, "I'm finally realizing exactly what it could do, and more importantly, what it should do." The story of Emily Bennett, the 6-year-old artist selling drawings for her mother's medication, exploded across social media within hours of a bystander posting a video of her confrontation with security. The clip, showing the small girl standing her ground while clutching her artwork, quickly went viral, but it was the revelation of James Richardson's involvement that turned it into a national conversation. Local news stations descended upon the corner where Emily had set up her makeshift art gallery. The narrative was irresistible: a child's determination to save her mother, a CEO's rediscovery of his conscience, and the exposure of corporate fraud that had devastated countless families. But everyone had an opinion, and they weren't shy about sharing them. "This is what's wrong with our healthcare system," declared one viral tweet that garnered millions of engagements. A 6-year-old shouldn't have to sell drawings to keep her mother alive. Others countered with accusations of exploitation, suggesting Sarah Parker was using her daughter for sympathy. The truth, as always, was far more complex. The Richardson Tower became ground zero for protests. Hundreds gathered, many holding signs featuring Emily's drawings reproduced from social media. "Healthcare is a human right," read one poster, decorated with Emily's characteristic heart designs. Another proclaimed, "When a child shows more humanity than a corporation." But the community response wasn't limited to protests and social media outrage. Mrs. Chen, who had been caring for Tommy, began receiving packages from strangers around the country: children's books, medical supplies, and handwritten notes of support. Her small apartment became a makeshift command center for the growing movement. Local artists organized an impromptu exhibition of their work alongside Emily's drawings in a nearby gallery. "Art for Hearts," they called it, with all proceeds going to a hastily established fund for families affected by Heartland Insurance's fraud. The exhibition quickly became a symbol of community solidarity. The medical community rallied as well. Doctors and nurses from Metropolitan Hospital, many of whom had worked with Sarah, began offering free consultations to other potential victims of insurance fraud. Dr. Martinez, the head of cardiology, publicly pledged to provide ongoing care for both Sarah and Tommy, regardless of their ability to pay. However, not all responses were supportive. Critics emerged, questioning everything from Sarah's parenting decisions to James's motivations. But business analysts on cable news debated whether Richardson Healthcare's CEO had lost his mind, pointing to the company's plummeting stock price as evidence that corporate responsibility had gone too far. Frank Miller, the security guard who had confronted Emily, became an unexpected ally. After his shift that day, he returned to the corner with his daughter's old art supplies. "I was wrong," he told reporters, his voice gruff with emotion. Sometimes it takes a child to remind us of our humanity. His actions inspired other security personnel to start a fund for families living in their cars. The local school community mobilized as well. When Emily's teacher, Mrs. Anderson, learned that her star art student had been missing classes to sell drawings, she organized a school-wide art fair. Children from across the district contributed artwork, many including messages of support for the Bennett family. Social workers and housing advocates used the story to highlight the growing crisis of families living in their vehicles. Statistics emerged showing that Sarah and Emily's situation wasn't unique. Thousands of families were one medical emergency away from homelessness. The story became a rallying cry for healthcare reform. Linda Thompson, the paralegal who had criticized Emily, made a public apology after learning about Sarah's history of helping others. She started a legal aid initiative for families fighting insurance fraud, naming it Emily's Justice Project. Religious communities joined the movement, with local churches and synagogues offering temporary housing and support services. The Interfaith Coalition's message was simple: when a child shows us the way, we must follow. As the story spread, other victims of Heartland Insurance began coming forward. Their testimonies painted a picture of systematic exploitation that couldn't be ignored. Emily's Corner became a gathering place for these families, each sharing their own stories of denied claims and lost savings. The response transcended political divisions. Conservative commentators who initially dismissed the story as liberal propaganda found themselves moved by Emily's handwritten letter to her mother. Liberal activists who wanted to vilify all corporate executives had to reconcile their narrative with James Richardson's actions. The legal battle erupted like a carefully orchestrated symphony of chaos. Within hours of James Richardson's public acknowledgement of Heartland Insurance's fraud, the Richardson Healthcare Board called an emergency meeting. The company's legal team, led by veteran corporate attorney Maxwell Stone, arrived with thick folders of non-disclosure agreements and prepared statements designed to contain the situation. But James had already set his own legal strategy in motion. He'd contacted Alexandra Rivera, a former prosecutor known for taking on corporate fraud cases, who had been building a case against Heartland Insurance for years. Together, they began unraveling the complex web of shell companies and fraudulent claims that had ensnared families like the Bennetts. The boardroom at Richardson Healthcare became a battlefield. William Preston, flanked by corporate lawyers, presented a united front against James. "This is corporate suicide," Preston argued, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "We have a responsibility to our shareholders." James's response was simple: "We have a responsibility to our conscience first." The legal documents Sarah Parker had gathered during her original investigation suddenly became crucial evidence. Before her illness, she had meticulously documented patterns of fraud, storing copies with her sister in Oregon. These files, combined with James's internal access, created a devastating picture of corporate malfeasance. Multiple class action lawsuits emerged simultaneously. Law firms that had previously ignored individual complaints against Heartland Insurance now scrambled to represent groups of victims. The story of Emily's drawings became the human face of a much larger legal battle, with her mother's detailed records providing the backbone of the cases. Preston and his allies attempted to discredit James, leaking statements about his emotional instability and personal vendetta to friendly media outlets. They suggested that his childhood connection to Sarah Parker had compromised his judgment, painting him as a CEO driven by guilt rather than reason. Alexandra Rivera countered by deposing former Heartland Insurance employees. Their testimonies revealed a systematic practice of denying legitimate claims, particularly targeting vulnerable populations least likely to fight back legally. One whistleblower described specific training sessions on finding technicalities to void policies after major claims were filed. The battle took an unexpected turn when evidence emerged that Preston and other board members had created Heartland Insurance specifically as a vehicle for fraud. Internal emails showed them discussing the perfect business model: collecting premiums from desperate families while maintaining plausible deniability through complex corporate structures. James faced his own legal challenges. As CEO, his signature appeared on numerous documents related to Heartland Insurance's incorporation. The board attempted to use this to force him out, arguing that his public statements against the company constituted a breach of fiduciary duty. Sarah Parker, still weak but determined, provided video testimony from her hospital bed. Her detailed explanation of how the fraud worked, combined with her history of helping patients fight insurance denials, proved devastating to Heartland's defense. The sight of this former nurse who had sacrificed everything to help others, now fighting for her own survival, swayed public opinion decisively. Emily's role in the legal proceedings was carefully protected. While her drawings and letter became symbolic evidence of the human cost of corporate fraud, Alexandra Rivera ensured the 6-year-old wouldn't have to testify. Instead, her art spoke for her, each drawing of pills and hospital rooms telling its own story of systematic exploitation. The legal teams faced a mountain of evidence, thousands of denied claims, forged medical reviews, backdated policy cancellations. What emerged was a pattern spanning years, showing how Heartland Insurance had targeted specific demographics: single parents, chronically ill patients, elderly retirees knowing they would struggle to fight back. As the case expanded, other insurance companies began distancing themselves from Heartland, afraid of being tainted by association. Industry analysts who had initially defended standard business practices now scrambled to explain their positions. The entire healthcare insurance sector faced unprecedented scrutiny. Behind the headlines and legal battles, Emily's daily struggles continued. Despite James Richardson's intervention and the outpouring of public support, she found herself unable to break the habits formed during months of crisis. Each morning, she still woke before dawn, counting their remaining funds and checking her mother's breathing. The weight of responsibility had become so ingrained that she couldn't remember how to be just a child anymore. Sarah's condition continued to deteriorate, the stress of public attention and legal proceedings taking its toll on her already weakened heart. The doctors at Metropolitan Hospital, now providing pro bono care, expressed growing concern about her arrhythmia. Emily overheard them using words like critical and urgent, adding them to her ever-growing vocabulary of medical terms no 6-year-old should know. Tommy's situation at Mrs. Chen's apartment became increasingly precarious. The toddler's health issues, hidden for so long, began manifesting more severely. Mrs. Chen's daughter Jenny would slip Emily notes during school, each one carrying updates that made the little girl's heart race. Tommy asked for Mama again, his fever won't break, he cried all night. James Richardson faced his own personal hell. The board's attempts to discredit him extended beyond the professional into the personal. Old wounds were reopened as Preston's team leaked details about his mother's death, suggesting that his actions were driven by unresolved grief rather than genuine corporate responsibility. His ex-wife gave interviews describing him as obsessed and unstable. The pressure began showing in small ways. Emily started having nightmares, waking up screaming about pills floating away and hospitals turning into monsters. Her teachers noticed her falling asleep in class, her previously neat homework now coming in crumpled and incomplete. The school counselor tried to help, but how do you counsel a child carrying adult burdens? Sarah struggled with the guilt of her daughter's lost childhood. During her more lucid moments, she would watch Emily organizing her drawings and counting money, seeing a miniature version of herself, the same determined set of jaw, the same sacrifice of personal happiness for family duty. The knowledge that her illness had forced her daughter to grow up too fast became another weight on her failing heart. The media attention, while helpful for the legal case, created its own complications. Reporters camped outside Mrs. Chen's apartment, making it impossible to visit Tommy without revealing his condition to Sarah. Emily had to create increasingly complex stories to explain her whereabouts, each lie adding to her burden of guilt. James found himself isolated at the company he had built. Executives who had once laughed at his jokes now avoided eye contact in hallways. His assistant of 10 years resigned under pressure. Even the security guards who had witnessed his interaction with Emily were replaced, supposedly for protocol violations. The strain began manifesting physically. Emily developed stress-induced stomach aches, while Sarah's cardiac readings showed dangerous irregularities. James started experiencing panic attacks, his mother's last moments replaying in his dreams, now intertwined with images of Emily selling drawings in the rain. Mrs. Chen, despite her own precarious situation as an immigrant with limited resources, refused all offers to place Tommy in state care. Family stays together, she insisted, even as her small apartment became cramped with medical equipment donated by sympathetic doctors. Her own health began suffering from the constant stress of caring for a sick child while maintaining the secrecy Emily had begged for. The psychological toll on everyone involved became increasingly evident. Emily started carrying her drawings everywhere, unable to relax without her backup plan in case they needed money again. Sarah developed anxiety attacks whenever she heard ambulance sirens. James found himself unable to sign any corporate documents without obsessively reading every line, paranoid about unknowingly enabling more fraud. Yet beneath these struggles, a quiet strength emerged. Emily began teaching other children in the hospital's pediatric ward how to draw, creating moments of joy in sterile rooms. Sarah, between treatments, shared her nursing knowledge with other patients, helping them understand their conditions and rights. James, stripped of his corporate armor, rediscovered the passionate advocate he'd been in his youth. The breaking point came on a cold Thursday morning, exactly 3 months after Emily first set up her makeshift art stand. She had been awake since 3 a.m., alternating between checking on her mother in the car and secretly visiting Tommy at Mrs. Chen's apartment. The stress, lack of sleep, and irregular meals had been taking their toll, though she'd hidden it well behind her determined smile. The morning started with troubling news. Tommy's fever had spiked overnight, and Mrs. Chen's traditional remedies weren't helping anymore. Meanwhile, Sarah had experienced chest pains severe enough to frighten even her experienced nurse's judgment. Emily found herself running between the two locations, her small backpack filled with drawings she could no longer focus enough to sell. In the lobby of Richardson Tower, where she now had unofficial permission to set up her artwork, Emily's usual precision began to falter. Her hands trembled as she arranged her drawings, and the medical terms she had so carefully memorized kept jumbling in her mind. Several regular customers noticed her unusual pallor, but she waved off their concerns with practiced deflection. "I'm fine," she insisted to Linda Thompson, who had become one of her strongest advocates. "Just need to sell enough today for Mom's new prescription," but her voice lacked its usual conviction, and her normally neat display of drawings was uncharacteristically chaotic. James was in the middle of a contentious board meeting when his assistant interrupted with urgent news about Emily. He arrived in the lobby just in time to see the 6-year-old sway on her feet, her latest drawing of hospital pills falling from her grasp. The usually composed child looked disoriented, her face pale and drawn. "Emily," James called out, already moving toward her. "When was the last time you ate?" She turned toward his voice, trying to form an answer, but the words wouldn't come. The room began to spin, the polished marble floor seeming to tilt beneath her feet. The last thing she saw before consciousness slipped away was her scattered drawings floating around her like autumn leaves. The lobby erupted into chaos. James caught her before she hit the ground, her small body frighteningly light in his arms. Security cameras caught the moment in stark detail, a powerful CEO cradling a collapsed child, surrounded by drawings of the medicines that had driven both their families to the breaking point. Call an ambulance. James's voice carried the same authority he used in board meetings, but now edged with raw fear. And someone find Sarah Parker. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Emily had finally ended up in the same hospital she'd spent months drawing. The emergency room staff quickly discovered the extent of Emily's exhaustion: severe dehydration, malnutrition, and physical exhaustion. The tough little girl who had been holding her family together had finally reached her limits. Blood tests revealed she hadn't been eating properly for weeks, saving every penny and every meal she could for her mother and brother. Sarah, upon hearing about Emily's collapse, attempted to leave her own hospital bed to reach her daughter. The effort triggered another cardiac episode, leading to both mother and daughter being treated in adjacent rooms. The sight of two hospital beds, mother and daughter both attached to monitors, became another powerful symbol of the human cost of corporate greed. The media descended like vultures, but for once James Richardson's corporate influence served a good purpose. He used every resource at his disposal to protect the Bennetts' privacy, setting up security and ensuring only authorized medical personnel had access to their rooms. In Emily's backpack, they found her notebook pages of careful calculations, medication schedules, and a heart-wrenching list titled "Things to Sell If Drawings Aren't Enough." Her few remaining possessions, including her school books and art supplies, were all categorized by potential resale value. The news of Emily's collapse acted as a catalyst for the most dramatic boardroom confrontation in Richardson Healthcare's history. James Richardson strode into the emergency board meeting still wearing the suit jacket stained with Emily's tears, her final drawing clutched in his hand. The boardroom, typically a bastion of corporate sterility, crackled with tension. William Preston sat at the head of the table, flanked by lawyers and PR specialists hastily assembled to contain what they saw as a corporate crisis. The wall-mounted screens displayed plummeting stock prices and frenzied media coverage of Emily's collapse. "This ends today," James announced, his voice carrying the weight of decades of suppressed rage. He spread Emily's medical charts across the polished mahogany table. "A 6-year-old girl just collapsed from exhaustion trying to fix what we broke. I want every document, every email, every piece of evidence about Heartland Insurance on this table within the hour." Preston's response was predictably corporate. "James, you're emotionally compromised. Think about the shareholders." James cut him off by playing a recording on his phone, Emily's voice from the hospital bed, barely conscious, asking if she'd made enough money from her drawings to buy her mother's medicine. The shareholders. James's laugh was bitter. "Let me tell you about Sarah Parker. 15 years ago, she mortgaged her house to save my mother's life when this company denied her claim. Now her daughter is selling drawings on the street while we sit here in our $1,000 chairs discussing profit margins." The boardroom erupted into chaos. Some executives tried to leave, only to find FBI agents waiting outside. James had spent the night coordinating with federal authorities, building on Sarah's original investigation. The evidence was damning: internal memos showing deliberate claim denials, forged medical reviews, and systematic targeting of vulnerable families. Preston's facade finally cracked. "You fool! Do you have any idea what you've done? This company was built on managing risks, on making the hard decisions that bleeding hearts like you couldn't stomach. Your mother was just one casualty in a necessary business model." The words hung in the air like poison. James walked slowly to Preston's chair, placing Emily's final drawing in front of him, a crayon rendering of her mother and brother in hospital beds, with a price tag meticulously drawn in the corner. "No," James's voice was deadly quiet. "This company was built on my mother's grave, on Sarah Parker's sacrifice, on the tears of children like Emily. I just couldn't see it until now." He turned to the assembled board members. "Either resign now or face federal prosecution. Your choice." Several board members immediately stood up, removing their company badges. Others began frantically texting their lawyers. Preston remained seated, a sneer distorting his features. You're destroying everything we built. For what? Some nurse and her brat." James pressed a button on the conference phone. Emily's letter to her mother played through the speakers, her young voice filling the room. "I'm sorry I'm not a better daughter. I promise I'll make enough money for your medicine." The recording broke even the most hardened board members. One by one they chose resignation over prosecution. Preston watched his corporate empire crumble, his face growing redder with each departure. Finally, only he and James remained in the room. "Your father would be ashamed," Preston spat. He understood business. James smiled sadly. "No, Bill. My mother would be ashamed if I didn't do this. And that matters more." He handed Preston a federal subpoena. "The authorities would like to discuss Heartland Insurance with you." The story exploded across media platforms with the force of a hurricane. "CEO dismantles own company to save child artist," screamed the headlines. Cable news networks ran split-screen coverage. Emily's hospital room on one side, the FBI escorting William Preston from Richardson Tower on the other. The images of the 6-year-old's drawings, now displayed in the hospital corridor, became the symbol of corporate America's moral crisis. Social media ignited with drawings formally trending globally. Artists worldwide began creating their own versions of Emily's pill drawings, each piece telling a story of healthcare inequality. Celebrity influencers shared their own medical bankruptcy stories, while major news outlets ran investigative series titled "The Price of Profit: America's Healthcare Crisis." Medical professionals started speaking out. Dr. Helen Martinez, Emily's current physician, gave an emotional interview describing how the young girl could recite complex medication names but had been skipping meals to save money. The video went viral, prompting other healthcare workers to share similar stories of children bearing adult burdens in America's broken system. Inside Richardson Healthcare, a civil war erupted. Employees began leaking documents, each revelation more damning than the last. Internal emails showed executives joking about denied claims, betting on how long critically ill patients would survive without medication. The public's fury reached a boiling point when one leaked memo referenced acceptable casualty rates in relation to denied coverage. Conservative media initially tried to paint James as a traitor to capitalism, but their narrative crumbled when Emily's story intersected with traditional family values. The image of a child sacrificing everything to save her mother transcended political divisions. Even hardline pundits struggled to defend a system that forced 6-year-olds to become sidewalk entrepreneurs. Preston's arrest became a media circus. Reporters dug into his past, uncovering a pattern of similar insurance schemes dating back decades. Former employees came forward with stories of being fired for approving too many claims. Each revelation added fuel to the growing demand for healthcare reform. Sarah Parker's history of helping others emerged as a counterpoint to corporate greed. Former patients shared stories of the nurse who fought insurance companies on their behalf, organized fundraisers, and sometimes paid for medications from her own pocket. The contrast between her lifetime of service and her current situation sparked outrage across the political spectrum. International media picked up the story, contrasting America's healthcare system with those of other developed nations. Emily's drawings were displayed in European parliaments during healthcare debates. The Japanese artists created anime-style tributes to the little artist who changed America, while British children sent thousands of drawings to Emily's hospital room. The financial world reacted strongly. Richardson Healthcare's stock price plummeted initially, then began to rise as James announced sweeping reforms. Other insurance companies scrambled to review their practices, fearing similar exposures. Wall Street analysts debated whether corporate responsibility could coexist with profit margins. Local news focused on the community impact. Mrs. Chen's apartment became a pilgrimage site for families affected by insurance fraud. Tommy's story emerged, adding another layer to the tragedy: a toddler separated from his mother because the system forced impossible choices on desperate families. Celebrity advocates amplified the message. A-list actors read Emily's letter on social media, their polished voices cracking at lines like "I promise I'll be a better daughter when your better musicians" incorporated her story into songs. Late-night hosts abandoned comedy to deliver serious monologues about healthcare reform. The media storm reached its peak when someone leaked security footage of Emily's collapse. The sight of a small girl falling amid scattered drawings of the medicine she couldn't afford became the defining image of the healthcare debate. Public pressure forced congressional hearings, with Emily's artwork displayed prominently in the chamber. In the intensive care unit of Metropolitan Hospital, Sarah Parker's condition took a devastating turn. The stress of Emily's collapse, combined with months of inadequate medication, had pushed her weakened heart to its limits. The monitors beeped an urgent symphony as doctors rushed to stabilize her deteriorating condition. Emily, still recovering in her own hospital bed, sensed something was wrong when the nurses stopped making eye contact during their rounds. Despite her exhaustion, she forced herself to stay awake, counting the minutes between staff checking on her mother in the adjacent room. Her small hands clutched her latest drawing, a portrait of her family whole and healthy, as if it could somehow ward off the approaching storm. Dr. Martinez faced an impossible decision. Sarah needed immediate surgery, but her weakened condition made any procedure extremely risky. The doctor found Emily drawing pills again, but this time with surgical instruments carefully detailed beside them. "How do you know about these tools?" she asked. Emily's response broke her heart. "I memorized everything in the medical books at the library, just in case Mom needed me to know." The hospital staff, many of whom had worked with Sarah during her nursing days, volunteered to cover extra shifts to ensure she was never alone. They remembered how she had stayed late countless times for their patients, how she had taught new nurses with endless patience, how she had fought insurance companies with fierce determination. Now, they fought for her with the same dedication. James Richardson, upon hearing of Sarah's decline, immediately arranged for the country's top cardiac specialist to consult on her case. As they reviewed her charts, a chilling realization emerged: the delay in treatment caused by Heartland Insurance's fraud had significantly worsened her condition. The very company he had unknowingly overseen had brought Sarah to this critical point. The night before her surgery, Sarah briefly regained consciousness. Through cracked lips, she whispered to Emily, "I'm so proud of you." My brave girl Emily climbed carefully into her mother's bed, mindful of the IV lines and monitors, and showed her the get well cards her classmates had made. For a moment, they were just mother and daughter again, not victims of a broken system. Mrs. Chen brought Tommy to the hospital window, where Emily would wave to him from her mother's room. The toddler didn't understand why he couldn't go inside, why his sister and mother were connected to beeping machines, why everyone looked so worried. He pressed his small hands against the glass and said the words that made even the hardened hospital staff turn away with tears: "Mama sick. Emmy fix. Emmy fix. Emmy always fixes everything." While Sarah fought for her life in the ICU, a more insidious battle unfolded in the corporate world. Preston, released on bail, orchestrated a final act of vengeance. Through a network of loyal executives, he initiated Operation Cleanup, a systematic destruction of evidence linking Richardson Healthcare to Heartland Insurance's fraudulent activities. But late-night security footage showed teams of people entering Richardson Tower, carrying boxes of documents to waiting shredding trucks. Its specialists worked through the night, wiping servers and overwriting backup drives. Preston's loyal allies within the company executed a scorched earth policy, determined to protect themselves, even if it meant destroying James's ability to help the Bennetts and other victims. The betrayal cut deeper when James discovered that his trusted CFO, Michael Andrews, had been working with Preston all along. Andrews had been the architect of the complex financial structure that had hidden Heartland's activities from regulatory oversight. In exchange for immunity, he provided federal prosecutors with carefully selected evidence that painted James as the mastermind behind the fraud. Emergency board meetings were called without James's knowledge, Preston's supporters, though officially resigned, leveraged their shareholder connections to initiate a vote of no confidence. The company's stock plummeted as rumors spread about James's mental stability and dangerous philanthropic tendencies. Legal teams that had previously pledged support for the victims suddenly withdrew. Citing conflicts of interest, the carefully constructed case against Heartland Insurance began to unravel as key documents vanished and witnesses changed their stories. Preston's influence reached far beyond the company walls, touching judges, regulators, and media executives. The final blow came when Preston leaked selected portions of James's emails to the press, carefully edited to suggest that he had known about Heartland's practices all along. The same media outlets that had praised James's conscience now questioned his motives, suggesting the entire Emily Bennett story was a calculated PR move gone wrong. In the hospital waiting room, James received the news that the board had voted to suspend him pending investigation. His access to company resources, including the funds he had promised for Sarah's treatment, was immediately frozen. The empire he had built, thinking he could change it from within, had turned against him completely. The convergence of crises hit the Bennett family like a perfect storm. While Sarah lay in critical condition awaiting surgery, Tommy's health took a sudden downturn at Mrs. Chen's apartment. The toddler's fever spiked dangerously high, his small body fighting the same genetic heart condition that threatened his mother. Mrs. Chen, exhausted from weeks of round-the-clock care, finally had to acknowledge that Tommy needed immediate medical attention. The carefully maintained secrecy about his condition could no longer be sustained. When the ambulance arrived at her apartment, the EMTs were shocked to find medical equipment and detailed charts evidence of a makeshift pediatric ward maintained by a determined grandmother figure and a 6-year-old sister. Emily, still weak from her own collapse, found herself torn between 2 hospital rooms. The nurses would find her shuffling between floors in her hospital gown, dragging her IV pole, determined to be there for both her mother and brother. Her drawings now covered both rooms, bright splashes of hope against sterile hospital walls. The financial reality became dire. With James suspended and the promised corporate support frozen, the hospital began making noise about transferring Sarah and Tommy to a public facility. The specialized care they both needed hung by a thread. Emily overheard administrators discussing care options and financial responsibility, adding more terms to her growing vocabulary of adult worries. Dr. Martinez discovered Emily attempting to sell her drawings in the pediatric ward, offering them to visitors for whatever you can give the sight of the exhausted child, still trying to be her family's savior while attached to her own IV, sparked an emergency staff meeting. The medical team agreed to continue treatment pro bono, but they couldn't guarantee how long they could maintain this arrangement. A new challenge emerged when Child Protective Services arrived, concerned about the children's welfare. The sight of both Bennett children in hospital beds, their mother in critical condition, and no clear financial support system in place triggered automatic protocols. Emily, listening through her hospital room door, heard phrases like temporary custody and state care that sent her into a panic attack. Mrs. Chen, herself facing scrutiny for maintaining an unlicensed care facility, struggled to explain how love and desperation had created their unlikely support system. Her broken English and cultural differences made it difficult to convey the depth of her commitment to the Bennett children. The authority figures seeing only liability where she had offered sanctuary. Salvation arrived in an unexpected form when Jenny Chen, Mrs. Chen's teenage granddaughter, discovered a hidden cache of evidence in her grandmother's basement. While helping to clean up Tommy's makeshift medical space, she found a weathered metal box containing Sarah Parker's original investigation files, documents that had seemingly vanished years ago when she first tried to expose Heartland Insurance's fraud. The box was a time capsule of corporate corruption. Sarah, with a nurse's attention to detail, had documented everything: patterns of claim denials, forged medical assessments, internal memos discussing profit optimization through strategic coverage limitations. Most crucially, she had kept copies of emails between Preston and his conspirators discussing their plan to silence her investigation. Alexandra Rivera, the former prosecutor working with James, received an urgent call from Jenny late that night. Within hours, she was poring over the documents with a team of legal experts. The evidence was explosive. Not only did it vindicate James completely, but it also revealed a conspiracy far larger than anyone had suspected. Preston's network of fraud extended beyond Heartland Insurance into multiple healthcare companies. Among the papers was a handwritten journal Sarah had kept, detailing her interactions with desperate families seeking care. One entry stood out: her notes about caring for Mary Richardson, James's mother. Sarah had documented how the insurance denial had accelerated Mary's decline, and how she had witnessed young James working nights to try to save his mother. The parallel between his story and Emily's was heartbreaking in its symmetry. The most damning evidence came in the form of a recorded conversation between Preston and Sarah, made shortly before her illness forced her to stop working. In it, Preston openly threatened her family if she continued her investigation. The recording explained why Sarah had hidden the evidence rather than coming forward. She had been protecting Emily long before her own health failed. James's assistant, who had supposedly resigned under pressure, revealed that she had been quietly gathering digital evidence all along. She had maintained a secret archive of every fraudulent transaction, every manipulated claim, every corrupt decision that had crossed her desk. Combined with Sarah's physical evidence, it created an airtight case against Preston and his allies. The evidence painted a picture of systematic corruption that went beyond simple fraud. Preston and his collaborators had specifically targeted families with children, believing they would be too focused on survival to fight back. Emily's story wasn't unique. It was by design, part of a calculated strategy to exploit the most vulnerable. Armed with the new evidence, James launched a counter-offensive that would reshape the healthcare industry. His first move was bold. He called an emergency shareholders meeting, not in the corporate boardroom, but in the hospital auditorium where Sarah and Emily's story had unfolded. The shareholders arrived to find the walls covered with Emily's drawings, each one representing a family destroyed by corporate greed. In a move that stunned the financial world, James announced he would sell his personal stake in Richardson Healthcare worth billions to create a foundation dedicated to fighting insurance fraud and providing coverage for families denied care. The announcement sent shockwaves through Wall Street, but the sight of Emily sitting in her hospital gown, still drawing to help others, silenced any opposition. The evidence Sarah had preserved proved devastating for Preston and his allies. Federal prosecutors, armed with both Sarah's documentation and the digital archive, moved swiftly. But Preston's carefully constructed network began to crumble as executives rushed to make deals, each revelation adding to the picture of systemic corruption. James took personal responsibility for his past oversight, refusing to hide behind corporate shields. He testified before congressional committees, bringing Emily's drawings as evidence of the human cost of corporate indifference. His testimony, paired with Sarah's meticulous records, became the catalyst for sweeping healthcare reforms. The redemption came full circle when James discovered that the nurse who had cared for his mother had been collecting evidence all along, hoping to protect other families from the same fate. In honoring Sarah's work, he found a way to honor his mother's memory as well. The Richardson Parker Healthcare Initiative was born, combining corporate resources with compassionate care. Emily watched from her hospital room as James transformed from a corporate CEO into something more: a champion for the very families he had once unknowingly helped exploit. Her drawings of pills and hospitals now hung in the foundation's headquarters, reminding everyone who entered that behind every denied claim was a child's future at stake. The reunion of the Bennett family unfolded in stages, like a flower slowly opening its petals to the sun. Sarah's surgery, funded by the newly established foundation, proved successful. As she regained strength, the medical team deemed it safe to move her to a larger room that could accommodate both her children. Tommy, his own condition stabilized with proper treatment, was finally able to see his mother after months of separation. The moment the toddler caught sight of Sarah, he broke free from Mrs. Chen's gentle grip and ran to the hospital bed, his small body shaking with sobs. "Mama, Mama," he cried, while Emily helped him climb carefully onto the bed, mindful of their mother's monitoring equipment. Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, as she watched the family she had helped preserve finally reunite. The elderly woman had become more than a caregiver, she was now an integral part of their extended family. Sarah reached out her hand to her, whispering thank you in Mandarin that Emily had taught her during recovery. The hospital room transformed from a place of illness into a sanctuary of healing. Emily's drawings covered every wall, but now they showed new subjects, her family together, Tommy playing in a park, their mother smiling. The pill bottles and hospital equipment that had dominated her earlier artwork were replaced by hearts, flowers, and sunny skies. James visited daily, often finding Emily teaching Tommy to draw or reading stories to her mother. The sight of the reunited family helped heal his own wounds, reminding him of why he had chosen to sacrifice his corporate empire. He brought art supplies for Emily, but now she drew for joy rather than survival. The most poignant moment came when Sarah was strong enough to sit up and draw with her children. Emily taught her mother how to sketch the hearts she had become known for, while Tommy added his toddler scribbles to their collaborative artwork. Their laughter, echoing through the hospital corridors, became a symbol of resilience and hope. 5 years after the sidewalk art gallery that changed the American healthcare system, Emily Bennett stood at the podium of the newly inaugurated Children's Healthcare Advocacy Center. Now 11, she still carried her sketchbook, but instead of selling drawings for medicine, she taught art therapy to children dealing with family illness. The center, built with funds from the Richardson Parker Foundation, stood as a testament to transformation. Its walls showcased Emily's original drawings alongside artwork from thousands of children who had found their voice through her story. The famous pill drawings hung in the main lobby, reminding visitors of how one child's determination had exposed a broken system. Sarah Parker, fully recovered and back in nursing, directed the center's medical advocacy program. Her experience as both a healthcare provider and patient made her uniquely qualified to help families navigate the system she had helped reform. Tommy, now a healthy 7-year-old, often accompanied her to work, proudly wearing his future doctor badge. Mrs. Chen had become the center's cultural liaison, helping immigrant families understand their healthcare rights. Her apartment, once a secret sanctuary for Tommy, was now a legitimate respite care facility, officially supported by the foundation. Her daughter Jenny was studying healthcare law, inspired by the events she had witnessed. James Richardson, though no longer a CEO, found greater fulfillment in his new role. He worked alongside Sarah, using his corporate knowledge to dismantle the very barriers he had once unknowingly helped create. The sight of Emily teaching other children to express their fears and hopes through art reminded him daily that true wealth lay in healing, not profit margins. The ripple effects of the Bennett case transformed the American healthcare landscape. The Richardson Parker Healthcare Initiative sparked a national movement, leading to comprehensive insurance reform legislation commonly known as Emily's Law. The law mandated transparency in coverage decisions and established strict penalties for fraudulent claim denials. Corporate culture underwent a seismic shift as other healthcare companies scrambled to avoid becoming the next heartland. Insurance providers began emphasizing patient care over profit margins, while pharmaceutical companies faced renewed scrutiny over pricing practices. The image of a 6-year-old selling drawings for medicine had become a powerful deterrent to corporate excess. The art therapy program Emily pioneered spread nationwide, with hospitals and healthcare centers incorporating creative expression into their treatment protocols. Her original drawings toured museums and galleries, raising millions for children's healthcare initiatives. The sight of corporate boardrooms displaying crayon drawings of pills and hospitals became a symbol of the industry's transformation. Medical education evolved to include mandatory ethics courses based on the Bennett case. Future doctors and nurses studied not just the clinical aspects of care, but the human cost of healthcare inequality. Sarah Parker became a frequent lecturer at medical schools, sharing her unique perspective as a nurse who had experienced both sides of the system. Preston's conviction sent shockwaves through the corporate world. The sight of a once powerful CEO being led away in handcuffs served as a powerful reminder that profit could no longer justify exploitation. His network of fraudulent practices, once exposed, led to a domino effect of reforms across the insurance industry. On a bright spring morning, exactly 5 years after Emily first set up her sidewalk art gallery, she unveiled her most important drawing yet. It hung in the entrance of the Children's Healthcare Advocacy Center, a large, vibrant piece showing two scenes side by side. On one side, a small girl selling drawings in the rain; on the other, a community united in healing. The message beneath it, written in Emily's now mature handwriting, read, "Hope isn't just about wishing for better days. Sometimes it's about drawing them into existence." The artwork became a powerful reminder that change often begins with the smallest acts of courage. During the unveiling ceremony, Sarah Parker, James Richardson, and Mrs. Chen stood together, their unlikely alliance a testament to how adversity can forge the strongest bonds. Tommy, healthy and energetic, proudly helped his sister present her work, their mother's recovered smile reflecting the joy of their journey. Emily's final words at the ceremony captured the essence of their story. 5 years ago, I thought I was just drawing to save my mom. But sometimes when you try to save one person, you end up helping save everyone. That's what community means. We're all part of each other's drawings, each other's stories, each other's healing. The gathered crowd, including former patients, healthcare workers, and reformed corporate executives, understood the deeper truth in her words. Sometimes it takes a child's simple act of love selling drawings for $1 to remind adults of their shared humanity and responsibility to each other. Thank you for joining us for this touching story. If you were moved by Emily's journey and believe in the power of storytelling to create change, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing meaningful narratives that can make a difference in people's lives. Don't forget to like this video and share it with friends and family who might find inspiration in Emily's courage. We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Perhaps you have your own story of resilience or have witnessed similar acts of kindness in your community. By subscribing and sharing, you become part of a larger movement working to highlight stories that matter. Together we can ensure these important messages reach those who need them most.